Hello everyone to Poker Vlog number 11. This is more 2-5 no limit hold'em at the Bellagio. These hands were recorded on Saturday, October the 8th, 2022. This vlog is really long, and the reason for that is I'm doing something different here. I don't think anyone else has done before, but if so, I haven't seen it. Not only am I going to show you all of my hole cards for the entire evening, but I'm going to show you every hand I actually play. So if I decided to put money in the pot and actually see a flop, you are going to see what happened in that hand. I'm still going to focus on what I consider to be the more interesting hands for analysis purposes and things like that, but I'm going to tell you exactly what I did on every hand I played throughout the night. It's a lot, to be honest, and I probably won't be doing that on too many vlogs because this one took a really long time to do editing on and to prepare, and that's why it's been a while since my last vlog. But I'm really interested to know if you think this content is interesting. Do you think this is just way too many hands, overkill, boring, or do you think it's interesting to see what I did with all of my hands throughout the night? Let me know in the comments. I do plan on continuing to show all of my starting hands on most of my videos, but showing every single hand I play, as you can imagine, it took me quite a while to do that. One other quick thing to do before we get into this long vlog is I told you guys in the very beginning of this vlog that if I set out and I recorded a session of poker, I would make a vlog about it. That has been my plan and continues to be my plan, but some people requested that I do a 1-3 vlog talking about the difference between 1-3 and 2-5. And between my last vlog and this one, I did record a 1-3 session, and I was planning to make a vlog about it, but I'm gonna be honest with you, nothing interesting happened. I missed flops, pots were $40 pots. I ended up losing about $460 in that session with a couple bad bets, but still nothing super interesting. I've watched all those hands back to try to see if I could make a vlog about it, and I really think it would be boring to watch, so I am keeping it real, keeping it honest with you guys. I said I was gonna make a vlog about every single recording I did. I skipped this 1-3 session. I still plan to do a 1-3 session in the future talking about the difference between that and 2-5 and showing you guys the way I play 1-3, but I don't think it would have been a good vlog, and so I'm not putting it out there. But I am letting you know I did lose. I'm not hiding anything here, and if I skip any other vlogs, I'll tell you about it so that you know I'm not just picking and choosing vlogs I win in, or I'm just picking my most exciting sessions. But on that particular vlog, there was no interesting hands whatsoever. So I'm not gonna show that one, but it is in my running list of totals. At the end of the video, you'll see I lost $460 something in that 1-3 session. But other than that, let me know how you feel about this vlog where I show all the hands, and I hope you enjoy it. Let's get to the hands. I get seated in a new 2-5 game, and I once again buy in for the table max of 500. My wife Kim is actually seated directly to my right in this game. We only play together for a little while. I ended up switching games, but she was involved in a couple of my hands, and I'll quickly go over a couple hands that she played. Speaking of which, in this first hand, I'm on the button with pocket queens. The under the gun player limps. The +1 player raises to 15. The low jack calls 15. The hijack calls 15. My wife in the cutoff raises to 45, and I don't think I can just call 45 here with queens because there's so many people involved in this pot. I'm thinking that at least 3 people would probably call this raise to 45 and possibly more. I definitely don't want to play a pot 5 ways with pocket queens. So I 4-bet here to 110, and everybody folds. Kim told me afterward that she had ace king here. She would have called if anyone else called my raise, but when everyone else folds, there's not really any reason for us to battle it out heads up, so she lets this one go. In the very next hand, I have king 10 offsuit in the cutoff. There's a couple limpers. It gets to me and I raise to 20. I have 2 callers. The flop is 9-6-5 with 2 spades. Someone bets 30 and I fold. 2 hands later, I'm in the +1 with pocket 7s. I raise to 20, the button and the big blind call. The flop is 7-10-2 with 2 spades. It gets checked to me. I bet 20. The big blind calls and the button folds. The turn is the jack of clubs. It gets checked to me. I bet 60 and he folds. In the next hand, I have ace 10 of clubs under the gun. I raise to 20 and everybody folds. About 8 hands later, I'm in the big blind with 7-2 of clubs. The +1 raises to 15. The cutoff calls and I call because I want to. The flop is 3-4-5 with 2 hearts. I check. I am open-ended. The +1 bets 30, and I call with my open-ended draw. The turn is the 10 of spades. We both check. The river is the jack of hearts, and I'm hoping I can represent the hearts here, so I bet 60. This does not work. He raises me to 160, and I don't think he's really ever doing that with the bluff. I go ahead and fold my 7 high, and he tells me later that he rivered the nut flush. I believe him. 2 hands later, I'm on the button with pocket 7s again. It gets folded to me, I raise to 20, and the blinds both fold. In the next hand, I'm in the cutoff with 4-6 of clubs. The under the gun player limps. I raise to 20, as I tend to do with my strong hands, like 4-6 of clubs. The small blind and the big blind call, and the under the gun player folds. The flop is 5 of clubs, 2 of diamonds, 8 of clubs, and that's a pretty great flop. I've got a double gutter straight draw, and I have a straight flush draw. The big blind bets 25. My hand's super strong here. I could raise or I could call, hoping that I hit one of my many outs and he'll keep pumping money in the pot. Or I could raise a turn still with a ton of outs on the river if I missed the turn. But in this particular case, I just call here. The small blind folds. The turn is the king of hearts. Now he checks to me. I still love my hand. I have a ton of outs for a river. So I bet 65. And he folds. 2 hands later, I have ace-9 of clubs and the +1. I raise to 20, and everybody folds. 2 hands later, I'm in the big blind with jack-4 of clubs. It gets folded to the button, who raises to 15. Kim and the small blind calls, and so do I, knowing that this button range is probably pretty wide. The flop is ace-queen 2 with only 1 club. It gets checked to the button, who bets 20. Kim calls 20, and I fold here. The turn is the 5 of hearts. She checks to the button, who bets 45, and Kim calls again. The river's the 4 of hearts. She checks to the button again. This time he checks behind. She shows pocket 9s, and they are good. He does not show his hand, but I think she played this one really well. The raise on the button she knew also could be a lot of pretty weak hands, so even though the board was ace-queen on the flop, she read him as pretty weak, and she makes 2 calls with pocket 9s, and wins a decent pot by check calling and letting the guy continue to bluff. Unfortunately, she had already been coolered pretty badly twice before that hand. She lost to a 2-outer when she was all in on the turn, and she was also against aces with kings and lost the minimum in that hand. I would have definitely gone broke with kings against aces on that hand, but she found a way to save some of her stack. So leading into this last hand, in which she and I are both involved, she only has about 325 left in her stack. I'm in the hijack with jack-9 offsuit, and that's probably my favorite shitty hand in poker. The +1 player limps. The low jack, which is Kim, also limps. I limp. The small blind completes, and the big blind checks. So we are 5 ways to a flop, which is jack 6-9, with the jack 9 being of clubs. The +1 player bets 15. Kim calls 15. I raise to 45 with top 2 pair on a fairly wet board, and both of them call, and the small blind and the big blind fold. The turn is the queen of spades. I don't like that one. The +1 checks. Kim bets 45. I feel like I might already be beat, but for 45 I call hoping to hit a full house, and if that doesn't come, I'll have to see what the bet is on the river. The +1 player also calls. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time once again to play Name the Worst Card in the Deck. The river is the queen of clubs, counterfeiting my 2 pair and putting clubs on the board. The +1 player checks. Kim bets 125. I fold, and the +1 player puts Kim all in for her last 100 or so. I think it's a pretty crappy spot to be in. It turns out Kim has king 10 and turned a straight, which was what I was thinking she may have done. The straight is a strong enough hand. You don't really want to check it on the river, even though the queen of clubs is a terrible card for her hand also. But at the same time, when you bet 125 and you only have 100 or 125 behind, when someone shoves on you, you can't really fold it because the pot's laying you such crazy odds if this guy has a bluff or just 3 queens. So She does end up calling with the straight. He has the nut flush, ace 6 of clubs. She was kind of caught in between with her stack where she couldn't really fold to his shove, but she also knows she's in a bad position when she gets raised. I still think it's pretty hard to check the river with a hand as strong as a straight. If you have a huge stack, I think you can bet the river with a straight here, and then when you get raised, you can fold. It's just a tough spot with a straight. About 6 hands later, I'm in the cutoff with king 10 offsuit. The +1 player raises to 15. I call and everyone else folds. The flop is 3, 5, 10. Rainbow gets checked to me. I bet 20 with top pair and he folds. The very next hand, I'm in the hijack and I'm downgraded to queen 10 offsuit. Under the gun, the same player from last hand raises to 15 again. I call again. The cutoff and the button also call, as does the small blind. The flop is 7 of hearts, 2 of clubs, 7 of spades. The small blind bets 30, and I fold. 3 hands later, I'm in the big blind with queen jack offsuit. The under the gun player limps. The +1 player raises to 20. Everyone else folds to me. I call, and the under the gun player calls. The flop is 6, 2, 9 rainbow. The under the gun player bets 30. The +1 player folds, and I also fold. I think I could peel a flop here some of the time, but I did not feel like doing it this time, so I fold. The next hand, I'm in the small blind with ace 10 offsuit. Everybody folds to the cutoff, who raises to 15. I call, and the big blind calls. The flop is 2, 7, 9 with 2 clubs. It gets checked around. The turn is the jack of diamonds. The big blind bets 15. The cutoff calls, and I fold. 8 hands later, I'm in the big blind. It gets folded to the small blind. This gentleman says he doesn't chop. That's fine with me. If you watch the vlog, you know my feelings on chopping. I don't begrudge people who don't want to chop. Just be consistent. I have queen 9 of diamonds. I actually like this hand more than anyone probably should. So when he says he doesn't chop, I like my queen 9 of diamonds more than a blind hand. I raise to 20 and he calls. I will say one thing is a lot of times people who say they don't want to chop, unless it's been a consistent non-chop throughout the night, a lot of times they'll say that, especially if they're inexperienced, when they have a good hand. So you do have to be a little careful raising someone who doesn't want to chop if you don't know if they're consistent or not. This guy had just sat down, so at this point I don't know if he's telling everyone he doesn't chop or if he just doesn't want to chop this hand. Either way, I raise to 20, he calls. The flop is jack of spades, 10 of diamonds, jack of clubs. That's a pretty great flop. I'm open-ended with an over. He checks to me. I bet 25, and he calls. The turn is a pretty good one. It's the queen of hearts, so now I have top pair to go along with my open-ended straight draw. He checks to me. I bet 55, and he calls again. The river is an even better card. It's the queen of clubs, giving me the top full house. He checks to me, and I'm a little bit unsure what I want to do here. Sometimes betting this smaller for value is a good idea, I think. But in this particular situation, I'm hoping that he thinks that I'm trying to push him around or bluff him because he didn't want to chop. Sometimes in this kind of a scenario, people really feel like when they say they don't want to chop, you're going to go crazy and bet and raise and bluff with nothing because you're mad they aren't chopping. So I bet 200, hoping he has a hand that can call, or maybe even ace high that thinks I'm bluffing. He tanks for a little while, and he ends up folding. So I'm not sure if a smaller value bet of 75 or 100 might have worked. Maybe I get a call. But I felt like in this particular spot, betting a big amount might look like I was trying to be aggressive and angry at him for not chopping. It doesn't work here, but that was my reasoning for it. Either way, I win this one. 2 hands later, I'm on the button with queen king offsuit with the queen of diamonds. It gets folded to me. I raise to 20. The big blind calls. The flop is 6, 5, 8 with 3 diamonds. Since I have the queen of diamonds, I feel okay about that. He checks to me. I bet 20 and he folds. In this next one, I have ace jack offsuit in the big blind. We're playing 6-handed. It gets folded to the button, who raises to 15. I call and we're heads up. The flop is ace of spades, 8 of spades, 7 of diamonds. I feel pretty confident I have the best hand here, but I check so I can give him a chance to keep betting. And I feel he probably has a pretty weak button raise here. He bets 20 and I call. The turn is the ace of diamonds, so I feel very good about my hand. Now there's two different flush draws though, with the spades and the diamonds. I do check again. He bets 40, and here I think raising is the best play because there's two different flush draws and there's a lot of river cards I may not like, including some straight draws. So I do raise to 110. I feel like if he had a big draw, either of the flush draws, he probably calls, but I don't want to give him a chance to draw to those for his $40 bet. He folds. He probably didn't have anything. By checking, I think I gave him a couple chances to bluff off some money, and I doubt he probably was really going to be putting more money into this pot, even if I don't check raise. 4 hands later, I have king, queen of clubs in the hijack. It's folded to me. I raise to 20, and everybody folds. "11 hands later, I have ace-9 of diamonds in the big blind. The +1 limps, the cutoff raises to 25 and everyone folds to me, and only I call. The flop is 4-6-8 with 2 hearts and it gets checked around. The turn is a third heart, the 5 of hearts. I take a stab at it for 20, the cutoff raises me to 80, and I fold. The very next hand I have ace-queen offsuit in the small blind. The low jack limps, the cutoff raises to 15. I 3-bet to 45, and only the cutoff calls. The flop is king 6-3 with 2 diamonds. I c-bet for 40, and he folds. I play 4 more hands at that table and decide I want to move tables. My first game wasn't great. There wasn't a lot of action. There was a lot of small pots. There were a couple locals, and then at the time I left, a couple other locals came in who play super tight, so I decided to switch for a better game. Probably should have left that first game sooner. I keep trying to work on moving games sooner when I'm not in a great game, but sometimes I'm a little stubborn. I stick it out longer than I should. But in my first hand in the new game, I have king, queen of hearts and the low jack. That's a really pretty hand. The under the gun player is the 15. The +1 player calls. I'm still setting up my camera to record and getting situated at the table, so I just call here, but I think I definitely should be 3-betting here much of the time. Here I don't do that. The cutoff also calls, as does the small blind. The big blind raises to 90. This could be a squeeze, but this particular player, she looks like she probably plays fairly tight. Now, admittedly, this is my first hand at this new game, so I don't know much about this player, but just my very initial impressions are that she probably plays pretty tight. Everyone folds to me. I ask her if she has any black chips, how much she has behind. After she raises to 90, she only has a little bit over 200 behind, maybe 240, 250. I think it's a close call as to whether to call or fold here, but I just sat down in a new game. I don't know exactly how she's playing, and I feel like I'm probably behind with Queen King of Hearts, even though it's a beautiful hand and I hate folding it pre-flop. I just get the impression that she's probably not 4-betting to 90 here with a squeeze and a weak hand. She's probably doing that with a pretty strong hand. So I tank for a while and I end up folding. I regret not 3-betting this one, and then I don't know if she 4-bets. I'm probably committed to calling her at that point, but we'll never know. I fold, nobody calls, and we never see her hand. But from playing with her the rest of the night, every time she raised or 3-bet, she had very big hands. It doesn't mean she had it here, but I expect that she probably had a hand that was ahead of Queen King of Hearts. And I'm probably not getting the odds to call that I want based on her only having about 240, 250 behind after her raise. 3 hands later, I'm in the big blind with 7-2 of hearts. The under the gun player limps. The +1 player limps. Low jack raises to 20. This guy, from the few hands I've seen so far, seems pretty actiony. The hijack calls. The small blind calls. I'm not folding a suited hand, even if it's 7-2, for $15 in a pot where I'm pretty sure at least 5 people are going to see a flop. So I call here. Behind me, the under the gun player calls and the +1 player calls. We are 6 ways to a flop of 7-3-3 rainbow, with one of the 3s being the 3 of hearts. I check. It gets checked to the low jack, who bets 60. I have top pair. It doesn't seem like this flop should have hit the low jack most of the time. He could possibly have an overpair to my 7, but it seems unlikely he has a better 7 or a 3. After he bets 60, everyone folds to me. I call, and everyone else folds behind. So we're heads up to a turn, which is the 9 of spades. I check again, and the low jack bets 110. This still seems like a bad board for him, barring some sort of overpair, which he could have, but I read his body language as being fairly weak. I don't think he likes the board. I feel like he probably missed. So I decide to raise here, hoping he doesn't have an overpair, which I feel like he probably doesn't, but he of course could. I raise him to 250, and he tanks for a little while, and he folds. I probably have the best hand here. If he has an overpair, he's probably calling. He's probably not giving me credit for the 3 necessarily, although it's possible. I think this ends up not really being a bluff, but instead more of me value betting my hand and not letting him draw to 2 overs. If he calls, then I'm in a pretty bad situation where I won't know what to do on the river, although it'll probably be check call unless an ace or a king, something like that, hits the board. He could possibly fold a better hand than 7s, like 8s or maybe 10s here, but I doubt it. If I did have a 3, I would play it exactly the same way that I did play this hand. Either way, I win a decent hand with 7-2. 3 hands later, I'm in the cutoff with my favorite shitty hand, but it's less shitty because it's suited. Jack 9 of clubs. Everyone folds to me. I raise to 20, and everyone folds. 3 hands later, I'm in the +1 with Queen 10 offsuit. There's a live 10 on, so I'm first to act. I limp for 10, the hijack limps for 10, and the cutoff raises to 50. Everyone folds to me. I do fold this one. Queen 10's just not a very good hand. I probably should have just folded this for 10 in the +1 rather than call, and it's probably not a strong enough hand to really raise in the +1 either, although that's probably better than limping. I think I was just riding the high of winning with the 7-2 a few hands ago and wanted to see another flop here. 3 hands later, I'm in the small blind with ace-jack offsuit. The under the gun player limps. The cutoff raises to 20. The button calls, I call, and the under the gun player calls. The flop is 3-4-5 with the 4-5 being spades. It gets checked around. I do have the ace of spades. The turn is the 10 of clubs. It gets checked to the button who bets 35, and I fold. 3 hands later, I'm in the hijack with pocket 7s. The low jack raises to 25. I call, and the big blind calls. The flop is queen of spades, queen of hearts, 8 of diamonds. I think this is a pretty decent flop for 7s. The main overcard is the queen, obviously, and there's 2 of them, which makes it much less likely someone has one. I'm not too worried about the 8, so I'm really more worried about an overpair here. The low jack bets 55. I call, and the big blind folds. I feel like there's a pretty reasonable chance here that I'm ahead of 2 overs that don't involve a queen, but based on the action, it's hard to be sure at this point. The turn is the 4 of spades, which is a second spade on the board. The low jack bets 75, and I again feel like I could be good. 75 feels like a weaker bet to me than the original bet of 55 because the pot's quite a bit bigger now, and that's not much bigger of a bet. I feel like it's hard to call a raise here without a queen, although something like aces or kings probably still calls a raise here, but I feel like most pairs under queens, it's probably pretty hard to call a raise here. So I raise to 175, just like I would do if I had a queen here on the turn when there's 2 spades and some straight draws. He calls, which I do not love. The river's probably the worst card in the deck for me to keep betting against another better pocket pair. It's the queen of clubs, putting 3 queens on the board. Now me representing the queen on the turn seems much less likely. That's a pretty terrible card for me to keep betting on, and once he calls me on the turn, I figure I'm probably behind. He leads at the pot for 165. I really don't think that he can be bluffing here. When he leads at me for 165 on the river after calling a raise on the turn, I feel like he has to have a pair bigger than mine, or possibly the queen, but he's betting this river for value is my feeling. I don't think shoving all in is going to get him off his hand. I don't think he's going to give me credit for quads. This would be a great place to have them because I'm pretty sure he has an overpair and he's probably not folding. I unfortunately do not have quads. So I think about it for a little while and I fold, but he does show me pocket jacks. This bet doesn't work out, but I don't hate the way I played this hand. The very next hand, I have the other 2 pocket 7s and the low jack. Maybe they will work out a little bit better. It gets folded to me. I raise to 20 and only the big blind calls. The flop is Queen 3 2 Rainbow. He checks to me, I bet 20, and he folds. Two hands later, I'm in the big blind with King 8 of Hearts. The +1 player raises to 15. The low jack calls 15. The high jack calls 15. The button calls. And similar to the 7-2, I am not folding this hand for an additional $10. And this one's even better than 7-2. The flop is 4 8 7 all diamonds. I flop top pair, but I do not like these kinds of boards at all for top pair, especially 4 or 5 ways. So I check. The +1 bets 20. The cutoff calls 20. The button calls 20. Even though I have top pair with a good kicker here, I'm only invested $15, and there's so many draws. There's so many hands that already beat me, especially with this many players in. This is not the type of hand I like to mess around with, especially multi-way. So I fold my top pair with a king kicker here. The next hand in the small blind, I have ace-9 offsuit. The under the gun player limps. The low jack and button also limp. I just complete, and the big blind checks. The flop is 5-7 king, and I fold to a small bet. I think this next hand is interesting, and I'm not really sure how I feel about the way I played this one. I'm in the small blind again with ace-10 offsuit. The under the gun player limps, as does the low jack and the button. I raise to 25, hoping to thin it out a little bit, and everybody calls. So we're 4 ways to a flop. The flop is jack, king, 5, rainbow. So I have a gut shot, and that's about it, but that should look good for my range, even though it's bad for my actual hand. So I bet 50, and only the low jack calls. This particular player only has a few hundred in her stack, and she hasn't seemed like that strong of a player. She made a full house earlier in the night and just called down a river bet, and then when the other player showed a smaller full house, she thought she was beat, but she showed her hand and she had a better full house, so she ended up winning even though she didn't know that she had the better hand. So I think she's sort of inexperienced. The turn is the 10 of hearts, giving me third pair and putting an extra heart on the board. I'm not feeling too great about third pair, but this player also has been calling pre-flop and then calling bets on the flop and folding to turn and river bets a lot. So I lead again for 75. On the turn, she only has about 215 left. I probably should either be checking or betting something that puts more pressure on her, like 125 or so. But I only bet 75 in the moment. She calls and she only has about 140 or so left, which probably isn't enough for me to push her off of her hand based on the size of the pot on a river. The river is the 7 of spades, and that does not help. I have the option of checking and calling or putting her all in, and I decide to put her all in for 140, and she tanks and folds. I really don't think she can be folding any hands that are reasonable here. I think she probably even needs to call with the jack for 140 if she calls a flop and a turn bet. So maybe she just had some sort of straight draw and completely bricked out. I'm not entirely sure, but I don't like the way I played this hand, but it ends up working out for me here. 4 hands later, I have king jack offsuit and the low jack. I raise to 20, and everybody folds. 8 hands later, I have pocket sixes and the +1. We're 7-handed. Under the gun raises to 15. I call. Hijack, cutoff, and small blind also call, so we're 5 ways. Flop is 2, jack, 10, rainbow. It gets checked around. The turn is the ace of spades, and I fold to a turn bet of 35. 2 hands later, I'm in the big blind with 5-8 of diamonds, and I like this terrible hand. I've won some big pots with it and other hands like it. So the +1 limps, the low jack raises to 20, I call 20, and the +1 player calls. The flop is 5, 7, 9 rainbow with 1 diamond. I check my bottom pair with a gut shot, +1 bets 20. The low jack calls, and I feel like there's a lot of possibilities here, so I call. The turn is the ace of clubs. That's a pretty bad card, but it gets checked around. The river is the 7 of spades. When it gets checked around on the turn, I'm not entirely sure where I'm at, but it seems like most people would probably bet an ace there. I lead for 60. The low jack calls, and he shows ace queen of diamonds. So I guess he doesn't bet an ace there. And my stab doesn't work here. But I truly believe that if you're not getting called down with bluffs or stabs at pots, you're not bluffing enough. 4 hands later, I'm in the hijack with 7-4 of diamonds. The under the gun player raises 20. The +1 calls. I call. The cutoff and the button both call. So we're 5 ways to a flop. That is 8, 10, ace with 2 clubs. It gets checked to the button who bets 100. The under the gun player calls, and everyone else, including me, folds. 4 hands later, I'm in the small blind with 3-4 of diamonds. The under the gun and the hijack limp, so I complete, and the big blind checks. The flop is 4-4-2 with 2 spades. I lead for 10. The hijack calls. The turn is the 3rd spade, the 10 of spades. I bet 20, and he folds. 4 hands later, I have Queen 8 of diamonds and the +1. This is the 4th suited diamond hand I've had in about the last 10 hands, and the 4th in a row I'm playing, so they're pretty much due. I raised to 20. There's been no 3 bets in this game in a long time, so I'm not too worried about people going crazy and raising me here. Only the low jack calls, so we're heads up to a flop of Queen 4-4 with 2 hearts. My hand isn't super strong, but I feel like queens are probably good, and I like to mix in some checks. So I actually checked this flop, and he also checks. The turn is the 10 of hearts. I bet 25, and he folds. 2 hands later, I have 7-8 offsuit in the big blind with the live straddle on. A bunch of people just call in front of me, so I call for the additional 5, and the straddle checks his option. The flop is 2-6-6. The straddle bets 25. Some people call, and I fold. 2 hands later, I have 8-9 of diamonds on the button, and now, like your library books, like those DVDs you rented from Blockbuster, these are overdue. Gets folded to me. I raise to 20. The small blind and big blind call. The flop is 2, king, 5, rainbow. None of them are diamonds. It gets checked to me. I continuation bet for 25, and everybody folds. The very next hand, I have king 10 of hearts in the cutoff. It gets folded to me. I raise to 20. Only the small blind calls. The flop is king 4-5 rainbow. There is 1 heart out there. It gets checked to me, and here again I check back top pair. I feel like I'm probably pretty far ahead, and this player's been tilted and bluffing a bit, so I want to give him a chance to bet some money at me. The turn is the 4 of clubs. That one seemed alright to me. He does bet 25, and I just call. The river is the queen of clubs. I still feel like I'm pretty far ahead. He checks to me. I bet 75, and he folds. But my flop check probably earned me another $25. The very next hand, I have jack queen offsuit. I raise to 20. Only the big blind calls. The flop is 10-10-6 with 2 clubs. It gets checked around. The turn is another 6. The big blind bets 15, and I just fold a double paired board with queen high. The next hand after that, I'm under the gun with ace-jack offsuit. I raise to 20, and everybody folds. The hand after that, I'm in the big blind with queen 5 offsuit. There's a couple limpers, and I just check. The flop is 2-4-6 with 2 diamonds. I have a gut shot. I go ahead and bet 15, and everybody folds. 4 hands later, I have ace-queen suited in the hijack. The low jack raises to 20, and this is a lady that is local and I've played with a lot. She will not fold medium hands and will draw in bad spots, but she doesn't tend to bluff. I should have 3-bet this, but for some reason I didn't do that here. I just call. The button calls and the big blind calls. We are 4 ways to a flop of 7, king, 4 with 2 hearts, no spades. That's a pretty big miss for me. If I had 3-bet pre-flop, I'd be continuation betting here, but it gets checked to me. I check to the button who bets 25. The low jack calls, so I end up folding. The very next hand after that, I have one of my favorite hands, as those of you who've watched most of my vlogs will know. Pocket 4s in the +1. I raise to 20. The cutoff calls. The button goes all in for $44. That's like a sign, an omen for pocket 4s when someone's all in for $44. I call, and the cutoff calls. The flop is 2-5-6 with the 5-6 being spades. That seems like a pretty good flop for 4s, at least as good as you can get without actually flopping a 4. The cutoff is the guy I said that has been tilted and keeps bluffing on almost every hand, so I check. He bets 35, and I just call. The turn is another 5, the 5 of diamonds. That also seems like a pretty good card for me. I once again check so that he can bet. He bets 45, and I could raise here, but I still think check calling is the best play against this guy, so that's what I do. I just call. The river is yet another 5, the 5 of hearts, so there's 3 5s on the board. I have a full house with 4s. That also seems pretty good to me. I'm losing obviously to a5, a6, or any bigger pocket pair, but I don't really think this guy probably has that. I check to him again, hoping he's gonna bet and expecting to call and win if he does bet. He bets 100, and I feel like I'm probably good here, so I do end up calling. He seems reluctant to turn over his hand, and I feel even more confident my 4s are good, so I show them, and he shows 7-8 for an open-ended straight draw on the flop that never gets there, and the player who was all in pre-flop shows Queen-King offsuit, so I dodge a bunch of outs to win, because of course I did. It's pocket 4s. 6 hands later, I'm in the hijack with a hand that I guess some people would think is better than pocket 4s. I have pocket queens. It gets folded to me in the hijack. I raise to 20, and the button, who's a newer player to this table, 3-bets me to 60. I strongly consider 4-betting here, but by the time it gets back to me, we're heads up. So I decide to just call the 3-bet and see a flop. I think raising here is fine also, and I would for sure be 4-betting here if other players called his 3-bet. But since we're heads up, I think you can play this one either way, and both are reasonable. The flop is 8 Jack King with 2 clubs. Obviously, I don't love that flop because I can't beat hardly anything. If he was 3-betting me with ace king, I'm behind. If he was 3-betting me with jacks, I'm behind. And if he was 3-betting me with aces or kings, I'm behind. Essentially, I beat pocket 9s and pocket 10s and other random 3-betting hands like 6-7 suited that he wanted to get crazy with. But that's a pretty terrible flop. About as bad as you can get without there being an ace. I check to him, and he bets 40, which is pretty small in this pot. It's a third size of the pot bet. It feels pretty weak to me. I probably fold to any strong bet here. I decide to call. It just seems a little fishy to me. The turn is another jack, the jack of spades. That's not super great either, but it does make it less likely that he has pocket jacks. I check, and now he checks behind. So I'm a little confused, but I'm pretty sure queens are good at this point unless he has quad jacks. Or maybe pocket kings. The only hands you would check back on the turn in position here would be just absolute monsters that you're hoping I catch up on. But I don't get that impression from him. And I'm feeling pretty good about queens, and I'm probably going to call any reasonable river bet at this point. The river is the best card you could probably ask for. Queen of diamonds. So now I have second boat. I'm still, of course, losing to kings full or quad jacks. And with his check on the turn, it's possible he has one of those monster hands, but I'm never getting away from my hand here. I still feel like he's probably pretty weak. The problem is I'm first to act, so it's hard to know what to do here. I feel like if I check and he has a hand like 9s or 10s, he's for sure just checking behind me. I could check hoping he bets on some sort of bluff if he had a suited connector that missed. But any kind of hand with showdown value, he's probably checking behind me unless it's a monster. So I decide to bet here, and I lead for 160, which is about 3/4 of the pot. And he folds pretty quick, so I don't really know what he had. I'm guessing it was 9s or 10s, but your guess is as good as mine. 3 hands later, I'm under the gun with 9-10 of hearts. I raise to 20, only the big blind calls. The flop is Jack King 5 with 1 heart and 2 spades. She checks to me. I bet 20 with the gut shot and a backdoor heart draw, and she calls. The turn is a king of diamonds, and it gets checked around. The river is a 6 of hearts. She bets 55, and I fold. 7 hands later, I'm in the +1 with Queen 10 of hearts. The under the gun player raises to 15. I call, the cutoff calls, and the big blind calls. The flop is Queen 8-7 with the Queen 8 being clubs, no hearts. It gets checked to me. I bet 25 with my top pair. The cutoff calls, and everybody else folds. The turn is the Queen of spades. That seems like a good one. The cutoff is the player that I've mentioned a couple times who is a little bit on tilt and keeps bluffing off money. So I check to him on this turn, and he bets 50, and I elect to just call here. There are some straight draws, and there is a club draw. The river is the 7 of clubs, giving me the top full house, and also bringing in the club draw, even though I still don't think he probably has that. I'm not sure if he can bet again. He only has about 150 left. I'm hoping at this point that he has a 7, which could be a card he's betting. He's been doing a lot of that, betting third pair. I probably should check to him again here so that he can keep bluffing, but for some reason this time I put him all in for his last 150, hoping he has a real hand, like a 7, that he can call with. He tanks for a little while and folds. He does show that he had an 8, so with an 8 here, the smart play would be to check back if I checked because he has showdown value. But since he'd been tilting and bluffing, maybe he bets his 8. I'm not entirely sure. The very next hand, I have ace 10 offsuit under the gun. I raised 20, the hijack and big blind call. The flop is 8, 4, 5 with 2 clubs. I check. The hijack bets 25. The big blind raises to 50, and I fold. The very next hand after that, I'm in the big blind with ace 7 of clubs. The straddle is on. The low jack, hijack, and small blind all limp. I also limp, and the straddler does not raise. The flop is a pretty good one. King 4, 4 with 2 clubs. The straddle bets 25. The hijack calls, and I call mostly with just a club draw here. The turn is the 5 of diamonds, so I miss on that one. I check. The straddler checks. The hijack bets 50. I call 50 and the straddler folds, so we're heads up to a river, which is pretty nice. It's a 3 of clubs. I make the nut flush, but there is a paired board out there. I'm first to act, and these are always tough positions to be in. It's hard to know whether someone will bet again on this kind of a board. I bet 300, which is an oversized bet, very quick, hoping that it looks like a bluff. A lot of times if people bet really fast, that's a sign of a bluff, because if they make a strong hand, they really think about their options as to how much they want to bet and whether someone can call. So I do that here, hoping he thinks it's a bluff. But he folds super fast, so I'm not sure what he had. I think a 4 has to think for a while before deciding whether to call or fold, and probably calls. And I think a king probably has to think for a while and maybe ends up folding, depending on if they think I'm bluffing. 4 hands later, I have king 10 of diamonds in the hijack. The under the gun player raises to 20. The +1 calls, I call, and the small blind calls. The flop is 2-7 jack with 2 clubs and no diamonds. The small blind bets 25, and I fold. 3 hands later, I have ace-queen offsuit under the gun. I raise to 20, the hijack calls, and the small and big blind call. The flop is 7 jack 8 with 2 clubs, and it gets checked around. The turn is the 2 of clubs. I have no clubs. It gets checked to me. I bet 30. The hijack calls, and everybody else folds. The river is the 7 of spades. I should probably give up, but I bet 60, and he calls. He shows 6-7 of diamonds for a river 3 of a kind, and I lose. I played this one pretty bad. I don't lose a ton of money, but my stab doesn't make a ton of sense here after checking the flop. Although his call with 6-7 of diamonds and no clubs is also pretty light, but that just goes to show that people are a lot more likely to call you on a turn if you check a flop. So don't love the way I played this one, but no biggie, moving on to the next one. About 7 hands later, I have queen 10 of clubs under the gun. I raise to 20. The low jack 3 bets to 60. The cutoff moves all in for 300. So I fold, but I probably would have called the 3 bet to 60 with queen 10 suited. I might fold that once in a while, but I'd lean towards calling with that much of the time. About 15 hands later, I finally get dealt the best hand, the number 1 hand, pocket 4s in the big blind. The low jack limps, the button raises to 20. I of course call 20. The low jack calls, and the flop is ace jack 8 rainbow. And I miss and fold to a bet. Let me check my notes. I don't think that can be right. 2 hands later, I have 4-5 of clubs on the button. There's a bunch of limpers. The cutoff raises to 20. I call. The under the gun and the +1 player also both call. The flop is 8-2-10 rainbow. The cutoff bets 60, and I fold. This has been long. There's been a bunch of hands. If you've made it this far, thank you for sticking around. This is the last hand I'm going to talk about. I have jack queen offsuit in the hijack. The low jack raises to 20. I call, and so does the small blind. The flop is 10 jack 2 with the 10 jack being of hearts. The small blind is the same player who's been doing a lot of bluffing and betting all night. He leads for 30. The low jack folds, and I just call. The turn is the 3 of spades. That doesn't seem to change much. This time he bets 40, and I just call again. The river is the 6 of hearts, bringing in 3 hearts. He bets 50. I just call again. He has ace 10, and I win. Alright guys, super quick, it's 215, in for 500, out for 1122 for a win of 622. Pretty good. Probably made some bluffs I shouldn't have. Probably played some cards I shouldn't have, but overall, pretty good night. Happy to take the win, and hopefully they keep going good. Alright, thanks for watching the hands, everybody. If you enjoyed this vlog, please like and subscribe, and always enjoy people sending me comments. I try to reply to pretty much all of those. And yeah, so far the sessions have been going pretty good. Hopefully the vlogs keep going well, and let me know what you do and don't like about them. And I'm always trying to improve them as I go, but thanks again for watching, and hopefully we'll see you next time.